Hey guys, today I'll show you a science fiction thriller TV series named Halo Season 2. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins with the alien force launching an assault on humanity's colonies, bringing the galaxy to the brink of war. On this remote colony planet, residents were scrambling to evacuate. Suddenly, a powerful signal jam disrupted their communications with headquarters. The Master Chief, John, sensed trouble and sprinted toward the relay station perched on a high ridge. Reaching the steep cliff, he found the area deserted, with only a few abandoned vehicles and communication devices lying around. John concluded something had definitely gone wrong. Just then, gunfire sounded ahead, leading him to a lone missing Marine. After a quick inquiry, he learned the relay station had just suffered a powerful magnetic disturbance, and shadows had been spotted moving in the thick fog. Barely finishing his sentence, the Marine vanished before John's eyes, prompting him to yell for a quick retreat. In no time, John's Spartan team was reduced to just him and a female Marine named Talia. Suddenly, a lightsaber sliced through the fog, and John finally got a clear look at their enemy, an alien warrior from the Covenant. After a fierce struggle, he barely managed to take down the foe, only for more warriors to ambush them. Fighting desperately, John took out the immediate threat. Just then, to his surprise, he spotted the supposedly fallen Talia still alive. As he reached to help her up, more elite warriors emerged from the mist, larger and more imposing than the first group. But in the next moment, they collectively sheathed their energy swords, and John caught a glimpse of a figure in the distance, seemingly ordering the alien warriors to retreat. Moments later, beams of light descended from the sky. It was the alien Covenant initiating a long-range attack. Vast areas of land turned to molten lava under intense heat, forcing the Marines stationed there into an urgent evacuation. Many transport ships barely had time to lift off before being struck down, reduced to ashes. As John and a group of natives narrowly passed by, these people showed no intention of leaving, choosing instead to remain and be transformed into glass with their homeland. John watched helplessly as they slowly disappeared into the waves of lava. In recent months, several of humanity's colony planets had been turned into glass by the alien Covenant, and John couldn't understand why they would deploy alien warriors for ground combat beforehand. The captain was preparing to report this to the Intelligence Bureau when a man named James suddenly burst into the meeting room. He is the new head of the Spartan project, replacing Dr. Halsey, who had left the UN headquarters. The Spartans in attendance exchanged skeptical glances, clearly unimpressed with their new leader, who didn't think much of them either. Despite the Spartans' impressive combat prowess, their experience of neural enhancements and memory awakening had branded them as the most unpredictable elements in the command's eyes. So they were now restricted to basic tasks in the rear, barred from frontline engagements. John, however, paid no mind to these setbacks, seeking out James privately to recount his experiences on the colony planet. He argued that the alien Covenant was likely training their warriors in ground combat, otherwise they would simply turn the planets into glass and ashes outright. Yet James, like other high-ranking officers, harbored deep-seated bias against John and the Spartans, refusing to trust any intelligence or recommendations from them. To make matters worse, the command entirely overlooked John's bravery in the evacuation mission, while lavishing praise and awarding a Cross of Valor to the surviving Marine Talia for her courage against the Covenant. The Spartans were furious after watching the news, feeling sidelined for far too long. John, simmering with anger, confronted James once more, warning that this kind of misinformation could lead soldiers to underestimate the enemy, resulting in devastating losses. James, however, was in a bind. The military's deliberate downplaying of the Spartans' role was a necessary move, given their actions had severely strained trust. After the evacuation encounter, John reported that the Covenant warriors had retreated on their own. Who would believe that unless John had struck a secret deal with the aliens? Left without a retort, John struggled to understand the aliens' motives himself. With no other recourse, he discreetly sought out the former Admiral who had resigned under pressure from covering for the Spartans' unsanctioned actions last season. Though the Admiral's influence still lingered, she listened to John's theories about the Covenant with a hint of indifference, suggesting vaguely that John should reach out if he uncovered anything new. John sighed as he left the room, realizing how hard it was to find someone he could truly trust. What he didn't expect, however, was that one of his few friends in the galaxy, Soren, was facing a crisis of his own. A young man claimed he had tracked down Dr. Halsey's whereabouts, but when he piloted his ship to the specified location, he found himself walking straight into a trap. As his ship veered out of control, a group of UN soldiers appeared, seizing Soren under accusations of severe crimes. John felt frustrated. He rushed to the central hall, only to find someone updating the list of personnel assigned to off-world missions. Among the names was Spartan squad member Cobalt. Outraged, John protested, arguing that Cobalt was only missing in action, not dead, so why remove his tag? But the worker was just following orders and had no idea of the reasoning. John immediately sought out James, demanding to know if something had gone wrong on Cobalt's mission. James responded with a mocking tone, saying, "Spartans don't die, they simply go missing." Fuming, John decided he would personally search for his potentially endangered subordinate. James warned him that going off mission would result in severe punishment, as no one could be certain of his allegiances with the Covenant. John almost laughed at the absurdity. Despite his actions on the colony planet, which hadn't been officially recorded, the surviving Marine Talia had been there the entire time. Yet James countered that Talia claimed to remember nothing, providing no verification of John's account. He then cautioned John to keep his head down, reminding him that while the human alliance depended on Spartans, the soldiers inside the armor could be easily replaced. John seethed, finding no outlet for his frustration and anger but his intense training sessions. He was convinced that the alien covenant would one day launch a full-scale assault on humanity, and he would rather take a few hits in training than die unprepared on the battlefield. Though his teammates didn't fully understand his extra training regimen, they kept up with his demands. James, aware of the Spartans' discontent, privately approached them one by one, hoping to collect evidence of any misconduct on John's part. But he didn't expect their unwavering loyalty, as they staunchly believed John was the most qualified to lead the Spartan squad. Meanwhile, John had already arrived at Talia's home, intending to confront her about why she hadn't spoken up about what she'd witnessed on the colony planet. Instead, he found himself stumbling into a family gathering. Talia's mother mistook John for her boyfriend, as he was the first friend Talia had ever brought home. After an awkward dinner, Talia finally confided in John, revealing that all her comrades had perished on the colony planet and the alien creatures had spared only her. She admitted that if she were to report the incident in full, she would likely end up facing the same situation as John. He sighed, advising Talia that running away wouldn't help. Those creatures would return someday, and she'd better figure out why. Before long, John returned to base and had the computer pull up recent missions assigned to Spartans. He discovered that just before the Covenant's assault on the colony planet, the relay station on planet Reach had also been sabotaged, prompting the military to send Cobalt there as support. Cobalt had since lost contact, and John decided to use training as an excuse to travel to planet Reach and rescue him. Meanwhile, James, the new head of the Spartan project, approached the AI system Cortana and input all recent military data, receiving a grim prediction. There was a 97% probability of a full-scale alien Covenant attack on planet Reach. James asked how to avoid such an outcome, but Cortana informed him that the conclusion would not change significantly no matter the actions taken. Far away on planet Reach, at the Bayonet Outpost, soldiers on guard suddenly heard noise outside and instinctively opened fire. When everything went silent, squad after squad ventured into the darkness to investigate, only to be swiftly struck down. The attackers turned out to be elite Covenant warriors, accompanied by the human priestess, Maki, who had miraculously survived the gunshot. Turning to Quan, the girl from the first season, whose home planet Madrigal was invaded by the Covenant. Luckily, the Spartans intervened and saved her. Now she lives in a slum as a slave, but a fierce spirit of freedom runs through her veins. She dreams of escape, even accidentally dispatching one of her pursuers. Out of concern for Cobalt's safety, Master Chief John decided to fly his Falcon to search for him, despite another looming worry. Upon arriving at Cobalt's last known location, the dark night was still and eerily quiet, with no signs of battle nearby. The team was puzzled, wondering why there was no air support for this mission. John had to be honest. He suspected that the alien Covenant had infiltrated planet Reach and that their teammate Cobalt was likely in danger. But since the higher-ups didn't believe him, he had no choice but to undertake this mission on his own. The team exchanged looks, realizing their leader was as bold as they come. Soon they arrived at the Bayonet Outpost. Oddly, the place was just as silent, with no trace of any soldiers. Suddenly, the communications console emitted a piercing static. John was reminded of the interference he encountered during the Covenant's attack on the colony, further confirming his suspicion that aliens had been here. After shutting down the console, the quiet resumed, and the group heard a rhythmic tapping from the floor below. Weapons ready, they cautiously descended, discovering a gate repeatedly closing and opening. Just as John prepared to pass through and investigate, a stern voice rang out behind him. It's the military personnel who had arrived to stop the Spartans from acting independently. John's suspicions only grew, feeling that the higher-ups were concealing something. However, when forcing open the gate, he found nothing inside. John's heart sank. As he feared, he and his squad were soon bombarded with accusations of unauthorized weapon use, unpermitted deployment of the Falcon, and even threatening officers with firearms. John maintained his innocence, arguing that a Covenant advance team had already infiltrated Planet Reach and that Cobalt's squad was likely lost. The captain, however, was furious, accusing John of paranoia. Records showed that Cobalt's mission was not on Reach at all, causing John to protest in disbelief. He had personally checked Cobalt's flight logs the day before. Someone must have tampered with the data. The captain didn't want to entertain further debate and announced that John's rank was revoked. He was confined to base pending a psychological evaluation. When John tried to speak up again, the captain cut him off, saying he was lucky not to be facing a court-martial. This time, John was truly in trouble. Even his fellow Spartans had their doubts about him. Since his memory had awakened, he was no longer the mindless soldier he once was. After grabbing the communicator left by the former Admiral and stepping into the elevator, he suddenly took down the guard watching over him. Spartan Kai, worried about seeing their Master Chief go too far, sought out James to plead on John's behalf, explaining that he was only doing what he thought was right. She believed that Spartans were born fighters and shouldn't be idle in a base. But James, already dissatisfied with John, believed soldiers should just follow orders. Too much independent thought only led to problems. Otherwise, John wouldn't have knocked out his guard and escaped from the base. Kai had no choice but to let it go, as James now suspected that John might be meeting with Covenant agents. After sending Kai away, James hurried to a hidden room where the body of a soldier from Cobalt's squad lay on a bed, his fatal wound unmistakably inflicted by a Covenant plasma blade. The captain, arriving in haste, finally understood that John's suspicions were correct. The alien Covenant was indeed planning an assault on Reach. James, however, remained eerily calm. AI Cortana had already predicted this outcome. He advised the captain to stay composed, revealing that the command had known about the threat for some time. They hadn't acted because they simply didn't have the resources to counter the Covenant, and under current conditions, all they could do was evacuate their families and assets. The captain, however, adamantly refused to abandon Planet Reach, home to millions of families. James was torn, suddenly facing a moral dilemma. Planet Reach was his home too. His elderly father, suffering from age-related ailments, was in a care facility and unable to leave. James had gently urged his father to leave the planet with him, but the old man, despite his fading mind, was stubbornly attached to his home. He had built the city's bridges himself, with memories of his late wife and daughter embedded in every step. Even if the city were destroyed, he would not abandon it. The next day, however, James made a decision. He visited his father at the facility and gently gave him a pill. If his father refused to leave, death would be a kinder fate than capture by the enemy. Meanwhile, on the distant planet Madrigal, Soren's wife Laura sensed strange looks from those around her ever since his arrest. As she rounded a corner, a powerful grip pulled her into an alley. It was her son's friend, Quan. Even she had realized that Laura was in danger. Soren's former crew had betrayed him, which explained how he had been so easily captured. To survive, Laura knew she'd have to escape the planet with her son. Sure enough, when she returned home, she found the former first mate had taken over, acting like he owned the place. Swallowing her anger, Laura demanded that he leave. Though he complied, the other crew members' mocking eyes betrayed a loss of respect, confirming the truth in Quan's warning. Together, Laura and a few companions made their way to the planet's port, where crowds were gathering to board evacuation ships. Having lived there for years, Quan knew the escape routes well. As the boarding announcement sounded, it was the perfect moment to blend into the crowd. After slipping past the guards, they entered the port through a side door, quietly joining the queue. From afar, Laura spotted the first mate chatting closely with the guards, clearly the mastermind behind Soren's betrayal. Cursing him under her breath, she quickly boarded her husband's ship. Once her son and Quan were seated, she prepared for takeoff, only to find the port's gates shutting. The guards had noticed her actions. Realizing her escape was blocked, Laura removed her necklace, handing it to Quan and urging him to take her son through a side exit and board another transport. After a tearful farewell to her son, Laura stepped off the ship and confronted the traitorous crew member with fists and fury. Watching Quan lead her son to safety, she finally felt a measure of relief. Things had escalated to the point where the traitorous first mate no longer felt the need to hide his intentions. He bluntly stated that although he'd risked his life alongside Soren, the pay was barely enough to get by, while Soren himself had amassed a fortune. He demanded to know where Soren's money was hidden, but Laura evaded the question, asking instead where her husband was. The first mate casually revealed that Soren had been sent to a prison on planet Reach. Having gotten the information she needed, Laura gave no further answers. Frustrated at feeling deceived, the first mate pressed her for the location of Soren's wealth. Seeing Laura's defiant silence, he angrily shoved her into the airlock. In a minute, it would be fully depressurized, and Laura's expression finally showed fear, but it was too late to do anything now. Surprisingly, she regained consciousness just in time. Quan had appeared, killing the first mate and taking down his accomplice. Earlier, Quan had already placed Laura's son on the transport ship, then ran back to save her. Without her intervention, Laura would already be dead. Meanwhile, John sought out the former Admiral again. When he informed her that the Covenant's advance forces had reached Reach, the Admiral was filled with shock. She didn't doubt John's theory, but thought his approach was too extreme. The higher-ups just wanted obedient soldiers, and as an unstable element, John would be removed even if he uncovered the truth. John, however, was undeterred. All he wanted was to fight the enemy and protect humanity's home. Now, on this entire planet, John's only ally was Talia, the surviving Marine he'd met on the colony planet. In just a few days, Talia seemed to have become much more worn down. As it turned out, during her encounter with the alien Covenant, she'd intercepted a piece of their signal. After a lengthy decryption, she finally understood its meaning. Curious, John picked up the headset, hearing what sounded like the Covenant warriors' oaths, reminiscent of a battle cry. This recording was undeniable proof that the alien Covenant was preparing to launch a full-scale assault on planet Reach. Just then, explosions erupted outside the chapel, suggesting the Covenant's main forces had arrived and the alien invasion might be happening already. Once the Covenant's supercarriers appeared, humanity's fate was sealed, with even nuclear weapons proving ineffective. For John and his team of Spartans, the bloodiest fight of all awaited them. John and Talia had just confirmed the Covenant's plan to take over Reach when beams of energy bombs exploded in the city center, sending civilians running and screaming in chicken voices through the streets. Talia wanted to run back to reunite with her family, but John held her back, knowing that area was under the heaviest bombardment, and going there would be suicide. Even the heavily fortified military district had been plunged into darkness due to a blackout. John's goal was clear. He had to return to the fleet command and suit up in his Spartan armor. Otherwise, his combat abilities would be no better than an ordinary soldier's. Talia quickly followed him. The civilians in the military district were still unaware of the impending attack, prompting Talia to shout and urge them to leave immediately. The next moment, screams erupted from the crowd. John spotted his opportunity and tackled an invisible Covenant warrior, slamming it to the ground. Fortunately, it was just a low-level enemy, and he and Talia quickly overpowered the brute. John judged that this was only a scout. The main forces could arrive at any moment. The two of them ducked into a room on the second floor, breathing a sigh of relief when they confirmed that there were no pursuers. Noticing Talia's worry for her family, John reassured her, saying whether her family is alive or not, she must first ensure her own survival. Otherwise, she'll never have the chance to see them again. Suddenly, they heard noises from the adjacent room. It was an antique dealer guarding her shop. Talia warned her of the danger and urged her to leave, but the shopkeeper refused, saying that many of her items were priceless relics from Earth and she couldn't abandon them. Talia was about to say more, but John gently pulled her heavy body away from the shop. Meanwhile, the human soldiers had already begun their counterattack, but the alien ships had gained air superiority. John happened to run into Riz, one of his fellow Spartans, who also hadn't managed to don her armor. The enemy had damaged the communication systems, leaving the soldiers to fight independently, and the road to the fleet command was already blocked. John quickly gathered a few Marines, planning to break through the enemy blockade. They abandoned street combat, moving instead through a building's corridor. The large alien warriors struggled to maneuver in the confined space, allowing the team to fight their way through and break past the blockade. But it wasn't long before enemy reinforcements were on their tail. With a muttered curse, a burly Marine strapped himself with explosives and charged toward the aliens without hesitation. The violent explosion finally halted the pursuit, leaving John and Riz no time to grieve as they hurried toward the fleet command. Meanwhile, in the military prison, Soren and former Spartan project leader Dr. Halsey were curiously looking around as loud explosions echoed from outside. Suddenly, the surroundings changed and the prison reverted to its original state, stripped of power. The virtual imagery disappeared and even the electric gates vanished. Soren confidently strolled out while Halsey, familiar with the area, gestured for him to follow. Strictly speaking, this wasn't a prison, but an experimental facility for interrogations, designed to break prisoners through virtual illusions. As they were about to exit, they saw several soldier bodies piled by the entrance. It seemed the aliens had already attacked. Instinctively, Soren grabbed a few weapons, finding comfort in the weight of them. Passing an office, Halsey encountered AI Cortana, who greeted them with a single word: "Run!" It turns out, the Covenant priestess Maki and an elite warrior were already closing in. Reacting quickly, Soren tossed a high-explosive grenade into the room. Meanwhile, John and his team had reached the fleet command, surrounded by bloodied soldiers. After a hasty farewell to Talia, John headed to retrieve his Spartan armor, only to be told by an officer that the High Command had fled, taking much of the resources including the Spartan armor. Cursing loudly, John found only the captain had stayed behind. Without his steadfast leadership, the fleet command would likely have fallen already. Without a word about their past conflicts, the two faced the grim reality. Alien forces were wrecking Reach's power grid. If the orbital defenses failed, the Covenant carriers would soon melt the entire surface of Reach into glass. Their only hope was to stop the alien saboteurs and buy as much time as possible for civilian evacuations. John caught on to the captain plan and understood they had to concentrate forces at the defensible choke point. The captain gave an inspiring speech to all soldiers, declaring that if they couldn't hold the choke point, the planet would fall. He also announced John's leadership, knowing that Spartans held great respect among the troops. All the soldiers rallied, led by John's Spartan team, although they lacked their armor. They took positions behind cover, ready for the alien assault. This battle would determine the planet's fate. But after waiting for a while, the enemy had yet to appear, filling John with a sense of unease. He ordered a flare round fired, and with a loud bang, the camouflaged alien warriors were revealed, sparking an immediate barrage from the soldiers. Fortunately, they caught the aliens in time. Any closer, the unarmored soldiers would have been in serious trouble. Meanwhile, Halsey and Soren emerged from the smoky ruins. Knowing this wasn't a place to linger, Soren was eager to return to his home on planet Madrigal. Although Halsey hoped he'd stay to help resist the alien covenant, Soren wasn't so easily convinced. He preferred a quiet life as a minor warlord on his asteroid. Soon they reached the fleet command, where the captain informed them that a civilian transport ship was preparing for takeoff upstairs. The three quickly took the elevator to the top floor, joining the line of evacuees boarding the ship. However, Soren stayed alert, moving toward the edge of the platform, and as expected, a swarm of Covenant brutes clambered up the building. Soren and a few soldiers began to hold them off. Meanwhile, John, stationed at a sniper point, received word of the attack on the hangar and immediately led the Spartans to assist. Thankfully, the civilians boarded the ship and were ready for takeoff, but the captain spotted an issue with the fuel line. As he stepped off the ship to make repairs, the brutes surrounded him. Calmly finishing his task, the captain ignited the fuel storage as the enemy closed in. With tears in her eyes, Talia activated the transport ship, determined not to waste the escape opportunity the captain had bought with his life. Meanwhile, John and his team finally reached the rooftop to reunite with Soren. The two friends had no time for greetings, as another wave of brute warriors surged in, prompting all soldiers to instinctively form an unbreakable defensive line. However, soon after, 3 elite brutes joined the fray. Without hesitation, John charged into the enemy ranks, engaging the tough leader in close combat. He knew he couldn't allow them to approach the defense line, but without armor, he was no match for the towering alien. A misstep left him exposed to a laser blast, and just as he lost his fighting strength, the Covenant priestess Maki called off the brute. One of John's Spartans tried to rush forward to help, but a plasma grenade pierced his armor, causing an explosion of diabetic blood. John roared like a goose in anger, but it was futile. With Maki and the elite brutes withdrawing, the battle finally ended, at least for now. Planet Reach was now a lone fortress, its abandonment by the High Command a clear indication that the military had forsaken it. Although Maki had called back the elite brutes, the other alien warriors continued their relentless attacks. Soren and Spartan Riz fought bravely, but they couldn't hold back the enemy forces. Worse still, with the planet's orbital defenses nearly destroyed, the alien Covenant warships were descending. It wouldn't be long before they initiated their glassing attack. Suddenly, a massive, armored brute dropped from the sky. John cursed, charging into the fray, but ordinary bullets were useless against its bulletproof muscles. Thankfully, at the critical moment, a ship opened fire on the brute from afar. It was Soren's wife, Laura, coming to their aid. The team's morale surged as they dragged the wounded John and Dr. Halsey onto the ship. Filled with grief for her fallen comrades, Riz turned back to retrieve the body of a fellow Spartan, ignoring John's frantic gestures not to risk her life. Spartan loyalty meant never leaving a teammate behind. Just as they were about to board, a shell struck Riz, and in a scramble, the others pulled her onto the deck, fleeing the soon-to-be glassed planet. Watching the fractured landscape, John slipped into unconsciousness once more. Dr. Halsey administered emergency treatment, and before long, he woke up. Riz, however, was in even worse condition and would need surgery at a specialized medical facility. For now, they could only keep her barely stable. John's feelings were deeply conflicted. Once, Spartans had been mindless war machines, obeying orders without question. But since his memory awakened, he and his team had gradually reclaimed their humanity, showing passion, independence, and a sense of self. This only fueled John's anger, as naval intelligence had abandoned his Spartan squad on planet Reach. They left without even a word, taking all the armor with them. Thinking of the stranded residents who couldn't escape Reach, John's fury only grew. Halsey urged him to calm down, reminding him that Reach was gone forever. John felt dizzy, again blaming naval intelligence. Halsey administered a sedative. John desperately needed rest. When he awoke, the little girl he'd once saved, Quan, was by his side. She had arrived with Laura. Looking at the still unconscious Riz, Soren informed John that they were heading to planet Alaria, a lawless world where they could seek medical care for Riz and perhaps find Soren's missing son. Back when Quan escaped with a young boy on the transport ship, she'd had to leave Laura behind to save her. However, Soren had since discovered that planet Alaria was the transport's first stop. Upon reaching the planet, Riz was rushed to an emergency medical facility, with Halsey assisting, while John anxiously waited outside for news. Soren attempted to comfort John, but seeing he was unresponsive, he merely mentioned he was going to search for his son. With his wife, Soren headed to the nearest bar, a prime place for information gathering. Flashing a generous amount of cash, he asked the bartender about a 10-year-old boy wearing a helmet. The bartender quickly revealed that a boy matching that description had indeed arrived recently and had been taken in by locals. Soren, cheerful upon learning of his son's whereabouts, reverted to his carefree self, though his wife couldn't understand how he could be so light-hearted after the destruction of Reach. Meanwhile, Quan approached John, expressing her wish to give the fallen Spartans a proper burial in accordance with her planet's customs, believing that the dead should be laid to rest. John disagreed, insisting that a Spartan's soul found peace only by dying in battle. Burial was unnecessary. This response angered Quan, who left, thinking of her late father and people who hadn't even received that chance. At that moment, Riz finally regained consciousness. Halsey informed her that due to severe spinal injuries, even if she could fight again, her combat effectiveness would be greatly reduced. Riz's eyes, though filled with despair, also showed a hint of acceptance. Upon hearing the news, John rushed in to check on her. Unsure if Riz was truly asleep, he bluntly declared that as long as they stood on the battlefield, Spartans would always be the strongest. Noticing Halsey's silence, a thought struck him, and he asked why she chose him to become a Spartan. Out of all the children, his performance wasn't particularly outstanding back then. Outside, there was a sudden commotion. Quan was attempting to bury a fallen Spartan on her own, but encountered resistance from the local residents. According to their customs, all deceased must be cremated to free their souls. Quan stubbornly refused, but when John arrived and thought it over, he surprisingly agreed to the cremation. The idea of freedom spoken by the locals touched a chord in him. That's also what he had always been searching for. Meanwhile, after a long journey, Soren and Laura finally arrived at the place where their son was supposed to be. However, the locals who had adopted him were incredibly fierce and believed that Soren and Laura were unfit to be the boy's parents. At their first meeting, they learned that the boy had nearly starved to death while wandering alone. Soren pulled his near-hysterical wife aside, assuring her he could negotiate with the locals. After some tough bargaining, the couple finally won their son back. Laura, heartbroken, watched as they approached the boy, but when they removed his helmet, they realized he wasn't their son. After some questioning, they learned that Soren's son had traded the helmet for food on the transport ship, meaning they had lost track of him once more. The cremation ceremony was already prepared, and the recently awakened Riz joined them, despite her weakened state. The fallen Spartan had been selected by Halsey at the age of 6, after his parents died in war. John felt that Spartans were a family and vowed to make those responsible pay in blood. As the torch ignited the body, John's eyes burned with fury. Sensing his anger, Halsey warned him against doing anything reckless. When he ignored her, she remarked that while John wasn't initially suited to be a Spartan, his deep connection to the Halo led to an exception in his case. Halsey believed he should continue exploring the Halo's secrets, as this was key to humanity's victory. However, John remained resolute in his desire for revenge against naval intelligence and James, blaming them for abandoning Reach and its people. The idealistic John, who had once dreamed of saving the world, was gone, lost in the ruins of Reach. Early the next morning, Laura returned to the bar owner, having spent the night contemplating his words. Convinced he was hiding something, she calmly wrapped a steel wire around an iron bar as she questioned him. Intimidated, the bartender confessed that Soren's son had been taken by naval intelligence. With a new destination, Laura and Soren prepared to leave. Incidentally, it was the same place John was headed. Just before they departed, John reminded Riz that it was time to move on, but she informed him that her battle was over and she intended to remain on this planet. John tried his usual Spartan rhetoric of never giving up, but Riz had come to terms with her reality, pointing out that John was still trapped by his anger and responsibility, both weighing him down. John understood her words. True freedom meant letting go. But this wasn't the time. There were things he still had to accomplish. What John could never have anticipated was that back at the UN base, his once loyal subordinate Kai had donned the Spartan armor and taken his place as the new Master Chief. James had promised Kai that if she obeyed orders completely, the Spartan Corps would grow to 100,000, a force capable of dominating any threat in the galaxy. Kai believed she could do better than John, throwing herself into rigorous training with the newly recruited Spartans. Among them was Talia. Although she had impressive skills, adapting to the enhanced abilities of Spartan armor would take time. Despite her and her teammates' efforts, they still failed to complete the simulation mission. Kai reviewed the combat mistakes and the weaknesses of the alien enemies with the team. She believed that only through extensive simulation training could they become qualified Spartans. Talia couldn't help but laugh. Deep down, she held contempt for this new commander. When Planet Reach had suffered the Alien Covenant's assault, John and the Spartans under his command had fought to the death, while Kai had fled to the UN headquarters to take up her new command role. Talia still remembered how the captain had sacrificed himself to cover the escape of the transport ships, choosing to go down with the alien warriors. Kai furrowed her brow at Talia's words, seeming not to understand the specifics of the Battle of Reach. Not far away, in an office, the former Admiral sat drinking tea with James. Given the dire state of the current war, the UN had even reinstated her to her former rank. The Admiral advised James to be cautious, sharing that 19 hours earlier, a ship had managed to slip past the defenses and land on the planet. She suspected that it was John and Halsey, up to their old tricks. Sure enough, at that moment, John was observing the UN base through binoculars. Soren couldn't help but marvel, as this planet wasn't marked on any map and had no recorded coordinates, yet John had found it purely from memory. Still, Soren's primary concern was how to rescue his son. John nodded, choosing to split up with Soren as he had another, more pressing mission: to infiltrate the UN and confront those who had abandoned Planet Reach. With a single step, he plunged into a patrol's path, taking down a guard in a flash. He hadn't anticipated that more guards would be hidden behind the surrounding rocks. John raised his hands slowly, his expression relaxed. He strode into the UN base, even though his limbs were soon shackled with chains. However, this was hardly an issue for John. With a sudden flex, he sent the guards flying like Barbie toys. Even without his armor, John's sheer strength was beyond what ordinary soldiers could handle. It seemed the UN had underestimated him. Meanwhile, Spartan Kai was immersed in intense training, watching the simulation recreate the scene of Reach's evacuation. James suddenly appeared, interrupting Kai's simulated battle. He reminded her that the priority now was to train these recruits to become qualified Spartans. But Kai was finding it incredibly challenging. The new recruits' physical conditioning was far below standard. After all, the first generation of Spartans had been selected by Dr. Halsey at age 6 and trained since then. Currently, these recruits had yet to even complete a single simulation mission. James reassured her not to be discouraged. With diligent training, results would follow. The recruits were thrown back into a brutal simulation. This time, their progress was noticeably smooth, and although several team members sacrificed themselves, Talia and the others finally reached the enemy's control center. The moment the virus key was inserted, the entire alien ship shut down. The recruits couldn't contain their excitement. They had finally completed a simulation mission. Only Talia sensed something amiss. She felt that this time the difficulty level had been lowered. Kai, realizing this, immediately confronted James, asking why he had adjusted the simulation's difficulty. James openly admitted that it was a reward for pushing the recruits to their limits. While they may not reach the same level as the first Spartans, at least they could compensate in numbers. Before Kai could respond, James played surveillance footage showing John attacking the guards earlier. With Kai's attention successfully diverted, he continued to manipulate her, suggesting that Planet Reach's destruction might have been due to John's collusion with Maki from the Covenant, and now he had come to the UN base with even greater ambitions. Kai was adamant that John wasn't like that, but James pretended to be reluctant as he disclosed a top-secret detail. During the previous Covenant assault on the Outpost, they had stolen a relic, and the only remaining relic was housed within the UN base. He deduced that John was here to steal it. Meanwhile, at the Covenant's airbase, a brute Shaman was antagonizing Maki, suspecting her of being a human spy and eager to kill her. Fortunately, a Covenant elite warrior intervened to protect her. After they left, an AI from the UN revealed itself. This was Cortana that Maki had seized amidst the chaos when invading Reach, and her deepest wish was to use the relic to return to the Halo and activate it. She had attempted to activate it many times, but had never succeeded. After much contemplation, she concluded that John might be the key. Perhaps only by her and John both touching the relic could they return to the Halo. Cortana offered to help her on the condition that she be integrated into the Covenant's transport network. Maki understood the risks involved, but to achieve her goal, she was willing to take them. Meanwhile, John was still wandering around the UN base, trying to locate James's whereabouts, but the heavy guard presence meant he couldn't just go wherever he pleased. John finally made it to an archive room and was about to check the base's layout when someone entered behind him. Turning around, he saw it was his former subordinate, Kai, who had been assigned to capture him. John, however, believed Kai had been misled. He told her that the real reason for Reach's fall was the inaction of naval intelligence, who had even transported the Spartan armor off-planet beforehand. But Kai had already been brainwashed by James's lies, thinking John was speaking nonsense, and in her anger initiated a fight. John urged her to think about how long they'd known each other. In response, Kai put on her helmet, delivering a crushing punch instead of an answer. Surprisingly, John didn't retaliate. He even encouraged her to complete the mission her superior had assigned her, as it was a Spartan's duty. Hesitating briefly, Kai knocked him out, but chose not to take him into custody. At the command center, the Admiral quickly dismissed the surrounding staff, and an AI projection appeared before her, pinpointing the location of the Covenant fleet. The Admiral nodded in satisfaction, as she and Cortana had already prepared a counterstrike plan. She instructed Cortana to find a way into the alien Covenant's transmission network so they could access all intel regarding the Covenant. However, what the Admiral didn't expect was that Cortana had also contacted John, urging him to reach the Halo before the alien Covenant did. John was puzzled. He didn't even know where the relic was. Cortana gave a reassuring smile, saying he could leave that part to her. The door unlocked by itself. With the AI's assistance, John moved through the base as if it were completely open to him, with guards being preemptively diverted from his path. Meanwhile, outside the UN base, Quan was led by a mysterious old woman in red who seemed to be guiding her through a maze of guards. Finally, they reached a hidden tunnel. The old woman gestured for Quan to jump down, and the young girl didn't hesitate. Just before she hit the ground, she was cushioned by a beam of light, and Dr. Halsey emerged from the darkness. It turned out to be a secret entrance to the research facility. The two of them proceeded, holding flashlights, but Halsey soon paused, confused, since there hadn't been a fork in the path last time she was here. She wondered if the tunnels had been expanded since then. Turning around, Quan once again saw the red-clad woman and unhesitatingly followed her, this time successfully reaching the research base. Halsey found her former assistant, who was now in charge of the facility's operation. Meanwhile, back at the main base, Kai was confronting James, demanding to know if what John said was true. James put on a helpless expression, explaining that Reach's destruction was unavoidable and that he had done his best to save lives, including bringing Kai off-planet. However, this response earned him no gratitude. Realizing the truth, Kai ran toward the training center. She had finally awakened to the truth, realizing John was still the righteous Master Chief she'd once admired, and it was James's manipulation that had led her astray. On the other side, John, guided by the AI, finally reached the chamber holding the relic, but he was surprised to find Maki there. Her connection of Cortana to the Covenant's transmission array had allowed the Covenant Shaman to intercept the signal, seeing it as undeniable proof of her betrayal to humanity. He immediately ordered the alien warriors to execute Maki. Unexpectedly, the warriors turned their energy swords against each other, with one becoming a traitor for her sake. At that moment, John drew closer to the relic housed in the human base, which seemed to resonate with its counterpart among the alien Covenant. A faint glow began to emit from both relics, as if preordained. John and Maki both reached out simultaneously and were transported to the world of the Halo. The landscape was vast and lush, filled with life, with no signs of a weapon of mass destruction. John remained wary of Maki, as he held her responsible for the fall of Reach and the deaths of millions. She, however, seemed unfazed, claiming that war between humanity and the alien Covenant was inevitable, and casualties were simply part of it. With a hardened expression, John questioned if she'd brought the Covenant to the Halo with the same reasoning, potentially dooming humanity. Maki shook her head, insisting that the Halo wasn't a deadly weapon to erase humanity, but a place of hope, a place where a new world could flourish. She believed both she and John were the true inheritors of the Halo. John, however, was resolute that aliens would always be aliens. At that moment, shadows of Covenant warriors appeared in the sky, and the two were expelled from the Halo, a ring of invisible energy pulsing outwards. The Admiral immediately understood the situation and ordered John's capture at any cost. If the Spartans learned that their Master Chief was still alive, it could trigger massive unrest, as Kai's promotion relied on James's fabrication of John's death. The Admiral even feared that John might expose the naval intelligence's abandonment of Reach. James, now visibly nervous, tried to distance himself by claiming he was merely following orders, but the Admiral quickly cut ties with him, emphasizing that she wasn't affiliated with the naval intelligence. She then commanded the assault on the Covenant fleet. AI Cortana had provided the location, though the area was treacherous, with solar flares, supernova, and even a black hole, making it nearly impossible for large fleets to engage. The Admiral decided to deploy all Spartans in a massive ground invasion. James, in disbelief, protested that his life's work was in creating these next-generation Spartans. They were stronger than regular soldiers, but not meant for direct assaults on the Covenant fleet. Nevertheless, the Admiral's resolve was unyielding. No matter the cost, humanity had to prevail in this battle, as the alien Covenant was approaching not a black hole, but the superweapon, the Halo. Meanwhile, as Maki was ejected from the Halo, the Covenant Shaman and elite warriors continued to battle. The Shaman only wanted to kill the traitor Maki, who had revealed the fleet's location. But before he could act, the AI's hologram appeared, distracting him just long enough for Maki to drive a blade through his heart, eliminating her greatest adversary. Triumphant, she marked the Halo's location on the map, the reason why the Covenant fleet was amassing near the Halo. The Admiral, through the AI, also learned of this plan and the devastating implications. If the Covenant gained control of the Halo, humanity's survival was in jeopardy. As for Maki's hope for peace between aliens and humans through the Halo, it was a notion the Admiral had never even considered. Guided by the AI, John moved deeper into the base. Suddenly, a soldier blocked his way. They had orders to capture John, but his reputation as a commander was so legendary that even after the officer gave repeated orders to shoot, the soldiers refused to move. Eventually, they defied orders and walked away. At that moment, Kai appeared, taking down the officer with a single punch. Realizing she'd been deceived by James, Kai's first thought was to seek John's forgiveness. But John's resentment burned like a raging fire. He couldn't forgive Kai for not trusting him, especially after she chose to believe someone who wanted him dead. Kai tried to explain, but John wouldn't hear it. All he wanted was to retrieve his armor as quickly as possible. Little did they know, James was watching in agony as the Spartans seemed like moths drawn to a flame, rushing toward the Covenant's warships. With the 1st Battalion close to annihilation, the Admiral's resolve hardened, dispatching a 2nd Battalion and preparing a 3rd. James sensed her ruthlessness. There had to be a reason for this seemingly pointless sacrifice of the Spartans. But how could personal strength alone defeat the Covenant fleet? Holding the training spike used by the Spartans, James approached the computer and inputted coordinates for the Covenant warships, shocked when the system calculated a high probability of human victory. As if realizing something, he left the lab, only to bump into his two biggest enemies, John and Kai. Cortana had deliberately led them there. Certain James knew the location of the Spartan armor, John restrained his urge to kill and demanded the armor first. Unexpectedly, James muttered that the Admiral lied. The computer's analysis had revealed that the training spike used by Spartans couldn't possibly destroy a ship's system. It was actually a compressed fusion device capable of annihilating everything within a million-mile radius. If detonated, not only the alien covenant, but humanity, and even the Halo itself, would be destroyed. This was the Admiral's true objective in deploying the Spartans. If even one of them succeeded, her mission would be complete. Both Kai and John felt a chill at this strategy. Following James's guidance, they finally reached the sealed chamber holding the armor. Sadly, the other armor's owner was no longer alive. John looked at James with murderous intent, but James defended himself, claiming he was just following orders when he abandoned Planet Reach. John decided to spare his life, on the condition that James expose the Naval Intelligence's abandonment of Reach. With tears in his eyes, James agreed, knowing disgrace was better than death. After he left, John turned to Kai, saying he thought the Admiral might be right. If the Covenant gained control of the Halo, humanity would be on the brink of annihilation. Sacrificing the Spartans, even if it meant they all perished, might be worth it to prevent that. Kai nodded, understanding his reasoning, and decided to join the Spartan Corps in battle, feeling responsible for the people she had trained. John didn't stop her. Instead, he turned to his armor and fell into a pensive silence. Meanwhile, Dr. Halsey and Quan had finally arrived at the secret research base. This facility was indeed built by the creators of the Halo. Humanity had studied it for years without unlocking its secrets. Using notes Halsey left behind, her assistant had managed to decode only a small portion, which enabled her to open a box in front of the main chamber door. Halsey believed this contained genetic information about humans and aliens, but she realized that, compared to what lay behind the door, it was insignificant. Quan suddenly took out an ancient metal disc, which she had found among Earth's antiques after Halsey left the lab. Though its exact function was unknown, its material seemed somehow related to this research base. Quan stood mesmerized by the patterns on the door, recognizing them from the cave drawings she had seen earlier. Following her memory, she removed a stone, and a projection of the night sky appeared, revealing that the key to the door wasn't mathematical or linguistic, but cosmic. Quan carefully adjusted the light points in the room to match the stars' positions in the cave. With her final move, something magical happened. The light points began to merge, forming a halo that aligned with the door. Miraculously, the door opened on its own. Halsey was stunned. The puzzle that had baffled humanity for years was solved by Quan in mere moments. Eagerly, they walked through the door, following a pathway formed by a beam of light. Halsey advanced with excitement, only to find another door at the end of the beam. She placed the metal disc in the center slot, and as the door opened again, they saw a massive laboratory. In one corner lay the body of a scientist clutching something in his hand. Just as they retrieved the object, the lab's machinery started to crumble. Sensing danger, Halsey's assistant quickly pulled everyone out, the light path vanishing rapidly behind them. The abyss below revealed glimpses of an ancient city. Halsey marveled at the advanced technology and ingenuity that must have gone into creating such a masterpiece. She believed the strange stone in the scientist's hand held the key to unimaginable advancements for humanity. At the same time, John had fully geared up and was heading toward the dock. Along the way, he encountered his friend Talia, also donned in Spartan armor, ready to face the Covenant on the front lines. She was filled with determination, even though she knew the battle ahead would be perilous. Raised under the influence of Spartan warriors, she was ready to march forward without hesitation. Watching her leave, John felt a deep sense of pride, believing his years of dedication and sacrifice had been worth it. Just then, the command center detected an unauthorized ship departing the base, piloted by none other than John himself. He quickly plotted his route for a space jump, targeting the Covenant fleet's position. Explosions surrounded him as Talia and Kai's squads prepared for landing. Gazing into the vast sky, John beheld the massive halo floating above, like a deity presiding over all. Spartan warriors were sent to engage the alien fleet in a life-or-death battle, but even a single rocket could tear apart a human transport ship. Fortunately, the Spartan armor was exceptionally sturdy. Talia, maintaining her balance amid the chaos, swiftly maneuvered toward the enemy ship, while one companion after another was shot down. She struggled to avoid the cannon fire, somehow making it close to one of the ships. Joining her were Kai and another comrade. As they flew under the massive carrier, everyone let out a breath of awe. Kai reminded everyone to first infiltrate the enemy ship, and all Spartans converged in this direction. Meanwhile, John, piloting his own ship, entered the battle zone, though his mission was to reach the Halo before the aliens. Kai's Spartan-led team was merely deployed by the Admiral to delay the Covenant and, if possible, go down in flames alongside them. But John had a different role. Watching Spartan after Spartan fall, a silent fury surged within him, and he promptly cut off communications with the Admiral. Fortunately, by this time, Kai had managed to gather several Spartans inside the alien vessel, and they cautiously advanced through the corridors. As they turned a corner, a massive ambush of Covenant soldiers awaited them, taking down several Spartans in an instant. Overwhelmed by the number of enemies, Kai immediately called for reinforcements, but just as a cruiser came to their aid, it was blown apart by an overhead carrier. The Spartans felt a sinking dread. This was a true suicide mission. Their only remaining option was to reach the control room and detonate the ship's compressed fusion drive with the spike, a last resort tactic that would obliterate both fleets. But with their armor's energy rapidly depleting, the Spartans had to pick up enemy weapons to continue the fight. In the midst of battle, Talia was wounded, collapsing motionless on the ground. As more comrades fell around her, Kai, with no other way out, prepared to plunge the spike into the control console. Just as the Covenant warriors paused mid-attack and fell to the ground with guttural roars, John appeared through the fading smoke. He had come to their rescue after all, because Spartans never abandon their comrades. With both fleets locked in a fierce standoff, John warned Kai not to insert the spike just yet. Now was not the time for mutually assured destruction. He then launched himself alone into space, heading straight toward the Halo. Back at the UN base, the assistant was still intensely studying the relic recently retrieved from the ruins. Under the microscope, she noted it resembled a container holding spores that had been dormant for millions of years. Oddly, they seemed to be showing signs of awakening. A curious researcher leaned in for a closer look. Upon leaving the lab, she felt a wave of dizziness, her hearing muffled, barely registering voices around her. In less than 10 minutes, her gaze turned blank. Just as a nearby bearded colleague was about to ask if she was okay, she lunged forward and stabbed him. Watching from a distance, the assistant's face turned pale as she realized the reawakened spores were replicating at an alarming rate. Still searching for his son, Soren and his wife suddenly saw smoke filling the area ahead. Soren felt a strange familiarity with the scene. This was exactly like the Spartan training ground, where he and John had once experienced similar challenges under Dr. Halsey's supervision. The thick smoke rendered visibility almost zero, making it impossible for Soren to handle the sudden appearance of enemies. In the ensuing chaos, not only was he unable to rescue his son, but his wife was also captured. Soren and Kwan retreated to the storage room to regroup. Kwan paused, feeling as though she sensed something dreadful on its way. She proposed to leave this place immediately. However, Soren was determined to save his wife and child first. Coincidentally, the Spartan commander James had been imprisoned for secretly providing John with armor and a ship. He was now detained in the same facility, across from where Laura and her son were held. Just then, a woman appeared to flex her disheveled hair. As she turned, an insect crawled out from her neck. Startled, Laura and her son retreated to the back of their cell. The infected woman pushed her head into the bars, and a spike emerged from her neck. Suddenly, a series of gunshots rang out, causing the infected to fall down. It turned out that James had taken a guard's gun for help. However, in the struggle, the guard also seemed to regain consciousness. Meanwhile, Soren and Kwan had managed to infiltrate the prison and located the monitoring room. After scanning the area, they finally spotted Laura's cell. Without hesitation, they rushed down the hallway, just in time to encounter another infected guard outside James's cell. They quickly shot the infected down, and Soren opened the cell door, reuniting with his family. Looking at the defeated James, Soren hesitated but ultimately decided to spare him, grateful for his role in saving Laura and their child. The group carefully geared up and began making their way out. They were shocked to find the corridors filled with infected. Soren led the charge, firing a path forward as Kwan and James supported from the sides, cutting down waves of attackers. Finally, they reached a door, but to Soren's horror, Laura locked it from the outside, effectively trapping herself. She had been infected by the ancient spore. Through the glass, she whispered her love to him before disappearing into the darkness. Out in space, on an alien ship closest to the Halo, Maki's face was lit with joy. Cortana warned her that if the ship continued at this speed toward Halo, it would inevitably disintegrate. A sudden anger flared within Maki as she remembered the AI's connection to John. She decided to destroy it, seeing no further use. Just then, fully armored, John arrived in the ship's hull and saw the shattered AI module. His heart sank, but to his surprise, Cortana's voice echoed in his ear. It had transferred itself into the ship's system. With John's timely arrival, it was safe from destruction, for now. As they drew closer to the Halo, John let out a battle cry, channeling all his energy into his right arm. A thunderous explosion followed. When John opened his eyes, he saw the smoldering remains of the ship, but to his amazement, the damaged ground beneath his feet was regenerating before his eyes. Cortana appeared and informed him that the Halo was a fusion of artificial intelligence and organic life. To take control, he would have to enter that towering structure in the distance. John knew that Maki had already gone ahead, but he was fully prepared for battle. Meanwhile, the human and Covenant forces continued their relentless fight. Talia's injuries had healed, and she and her comrades were transferred to the transport ship for recovery. Kai, however, stayed behind on the Covenant's battleship. Since she couldn't use the spike for a mutual annihilation, she thought of a better plan, steering the ship directly into the largest aircraft carrier. A tremendous explosion lit up the entire sky, and the command room erupted in thunderous applause. With the enemy's command center taken down, humanity seemed to have secured an invincible position. But just then, Halsey noticed something strange about the nearby commander, who suddenly lunged at his comrades, plunging the command room into chaos. Halsey was the first to react, stepping back and sealing the door shut. Watching the Admiral and other commanders perish on the spot, she made her way to her assistant's lab, not with panic but with a strange sense of excitement. She thought these spores were from an ancient civilization, and they could provide invaluable insights. Her assistant looked on in surprise, only to see Halsey standing motionless. She had also been infected by the ancient spores. Meanwhile, Soren led the others onto his ship, glancing at the receding ground with mixed emotions. He had sacrificed his wife to rescue his son, not knowing if coming here had been the right choice. Although Halsey was infected, her assistant didn't give up and placed her in rapid cryostasis, hoping future technology might provide a cure. Sadly, those who died on the battlefield would never see the light of day again. At Halo's towering structure, Maki prepared to activate the main door switch. John arrived just in time, and an alien warrior roared like a goose as he launched into a fierce battle with John. This time, with armor on, John was at his peak, skillfully disarming the alien's favorite plasma sword before delivering a relentless barrage of blows. Before long, the alien fell, unable to move. John remembered the fallen Spartans and raised the plasma sword, plunging it down without hesitation. Maki immediately opened the structure's door, but John questioned her if she was supposed to bring peace to the world. Maki's expression changed. Her intentions had shifted long ago. Now, she intended to activate the Halo weapon, wiping out both humanity and the alien Covenant, leaving only peace in the end. Suddenly, the shadow of a warship appeared in the sky, prompting Maki to hurry into the control structure. John followed quickly. Once inside the corridor, an enormous, single-eyed machine appeared and said, "There's something down below that's been waiting for him for a long time." And with that, Season 2 of this drama concludes. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.